So Graham Henry, welcome and thank you for joining us on Westpac Wire.
Pleasure.
Now you've been out of the rugby game now for a few years and clearly doing a lot of work with businesses. Very, very interested in the level of connection you see between your career in rugby as a coach and the lessons that you've taken from that we can learn from in the business world. How strong has that connection been?
Oh, massive, I think. You know, it's all about purpose and developing a culture to achieve the purpose, which is a set of behaviours, and that's exactly what you do in sport, I guess. We certainly did that in the All Blacks. Connecting better with people, making sure that you personally are the best you can be, handling pressure, just having the mental skills to be on the job, don't get distracted, and just developing other people, developing leaders, because the more leaders you can have, or the more people who are self-sufficient, in the Westpac business, for example, the better the bank's going to be.
In particular, I think one of the things that I've seen you talk about recently that has resonated very much in this day and age in business, we see talk about agile methodology and a whole lot of transformational business approaches. But one of the key themes has been how failure can set you up for success. You reached the absolute pinnacle in rugby, but you are very, very clear in talking about the times where you didn't succeed and how you learned from those. How much has that been important for you?
I think if you don't change, you're never going to get better, and so I was forced to change if I wanted to survive in the game, basically. So I think it's about constant change, constant improvement, trying to get better, and so on. It took me a while to learn that, Ben. It took me a while to learn that. So it was here actually, in Sydney, in that final test in 2001 against the Wallabies, the Lions versus the Wallabies in 2001, which was a very important time, because we got beaten 2-1, that's the Lions, against a very good Australian side who were world champions at the time. But I thought there must be a better way. And it was very much a coach-driven game in those days. And so it changed to a team-driven environment from a coach-driven environment. And that was the major change. There was other things that occurred from time to time, like 2007 Rugby World Cup, getting beaten in a quarter-final by the French, and why did we get beaten and how could we learn from that? That was more mental, and having the ability to handle expectation and pressure. So you learn more from adversity, I think, than you do from winning.
In reading back through your career and how it progressed and some of the interviews you've done in the past, I really saw that there were those two key points for you: the 2001 Lions tour, the 2007 World Cup. Would it be fair to put them this way? You had amazing success up to that 01 loss, which you took quite hard. It was quite a difficult loss for you to take. And I looked at some of the discussions you had around that at the time, and it felt like that was a very personal change for you. You called yourself an arrogant sod, I believe, in the past. It felt like that was a very personal growth point for you, as opposed to I look at sort of 07, and it felt like that was a team growth point for you as a group. Is that a fair way to characterise it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I grew up as a coach in the 70s and 80s and 90s, 80s and 80s. And I coached like everybody else coached, I think. And it was a coach-driven team, And there may have been one or two senior players who added to that from time to time. But I realised in 2001, and with the Welsh, and I was coaching the Welsh at the time, that unless I changed, I was going to die in the game, die as a coach. And I had a huge passion to coach. I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to survive. And I knew that if I didn't change the way I did things, I wasn't going to survive. So survival was a pretty big carrot, if you can appreciate that. And so I gave it a lot of thought. Got some very like-minded people together when we went on to coach the All Blacks. So it wasn't only me who wanted to change that culture. There was a number of other people as well.
Specifically on that, I think a couple of the bywords of your time of the All Blacks. One in particular is humility. I look at that period where you came back from Wales. You made a decision to leave Wales and come back. You went back to New Zealand, I think, into a defensive advisory role with the Blues, which looked to me as a fairly humble selection, just to come back but keep your hand in the game. But similarly, when you received the All Blacks role, you managed to convince Wayne Smith to come on board. Now, he had previously been the All Blacks coach. Is that the foundation of where the humility came from? People who weren't so much, looking out for themselves as just trying to get the best for the team?
No, the humility was a base about if you're humble and you've got your feet on the ground, you can always get better. Like if you up yourself and think you're the finished product, you're never going to get better. So it was about a behaviour, really, that we all need to be humble, understand that we're not the finished product, understand we can all strive to improve, and that became the key of the culture. Like Smithy was a huge part of that. Gilbert Anoka was a huge part of that. So there was like minds who were driving that mentality, that mentality of a team-driven culture based on humility.
You took over in 04, had enormously successful years in 05 and 06. 2007, World Cup year, ended up being another low point, the worst result for an All Blacks team in a World Cup. Now, traditionally, the All Blacks hadn't been particularly kind to coaches. I think if we go through Alex Wiley, Laurie Mains, John Hart, John Mitchell, their exit years were World Cup years all the way leading up. The team hadn't been successful. Tradition said you were finished. How did you manage to convince New Zealand Rugby that failure would lead to success?
I don't think it was me, you see. I don't think no matter what I had said, it would have made any difference. Like the team was very successful, like the current team probably, leading into that Rugby World Cup. The officiating in that game was questionable without going into any detail. But I really think it's because the players wanted that coaching team to continue. So there was Wayne Smith, Steve Hansen and myself, and they preferred us to continue rather than be replaced. And I think that was the key.
How important, as the leader of that environment, was it for you to get the right leadership around you, the right guys and support, particularly Hansen and Smith?
Oh, huge. I think the more you can get, the best people you can get available alongside you, the better it's going to be. So I strived to make sure I had the best, and spent a lot of time doing that. Like I rang Wayne Smith, and he was in Northampton at the time, coaching Northampton, and I knew him pretty well. I said, look, what do you reckon? And he'd gone through some difficult times with the All Blacks, and it hurt his family. And he said, look, I'll ring you back tomorrow. And he rang me back and said, no. I thought, that's not good. So I rang Steve Hansen, who was coaching Wales. I said, look, you've got to go and see Smithy and convince him to coach with us. And he did, and the rest is history.
And did you complement each other? In a leadership team, how important is it that your skill sets complement each other?
Oh, we were a trio, all on the same level. Like I was named as head coach, but we were three co-coaches really, and that's how I worked it. So we went to a press conference or had to do anything for the team, it was always the three of us doing it together, rather than the head coach by himself.
It's interesting you say that. I've been watching, I watch rugby all the time, clearly, but the last couple of years, I've really just seen a difference in, I'd say, coaches who are coming into the game. Michael Checkers taken over the Wallabies 2 years ago. We see him in the coaches block very much as a lone figure, and they would cut in a blow game, and we'd see Steve Hansen flanked by his team. And it just seems to me that approach of ensuring it is a shared responsibility, and I'm not suggesting that Michael Checker doesn't share the responsibility, but visually it seems very strongly represented by the All Blacks, that coaching unit. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it was probably more so in my time than today, but people do it different ways, and I'm sure Michael's got some very good advisors in different parts of the game. But I thought it was important for them to take ownership. I thought Wayne Smith and Steve Hansen needed to take ownership, because the more they took ownership of the team, the better they coached. Obviously, I had ownership. If the thing didn't work out, this is where the buck stopped. So, but I think in any business, if the more you can give people ownership, like the Westpac business, the more you can give these people, these 280 business advisors, ownership, the better they're going to perform. So it needs to be their team. It needs to be their bank, and be proud of it.
That ownership in particular, you formed your coaching unit. How hard is it then to develop as opposed to discover leaders? Richie McCaw was your captain back then. He was under some pressure as well after probably not winning in the World Cup. Were you lucky to find a Richie McCaw, or how hard do you have to work to get the leaders under you in the right mind shape?
Yeah, we were lucky with McCaw. McCaw was probably the greatest rugby player who's ever played the game, most influential anyway. But he had to develop. Like he needed to develop his leadership abilities as he went on. Like he was very young when he started as captain of the All Blacks. I think you've got to give people opportunity to lead. You know, that's the first thing. If they don't get opportunity to lead, they can't develop as leaders. So we gave young men opportunity to lead. So we had a leadership group of 7, but we also had leaders running the line out, or running the scrum, or running the fence, or running the mental skills, or who were out not in the leadership group. We also had different operating units in the team, 7 of them, and they were led by guys who were not in the leadership group. So we try to give these young guys opportunity to lead so they could develop, and then we gave them the skills to lead, if you like. Gilbert Anoka's job, develop their skills to lead and take ownership of that side.
The leadership that you put together clearly then was based in culture. If you could just talk about culture for a second, because it became very important very quickly for you. No matter how talented the players were, you didn't see long-term success, if I can put it that way, unless you had a cultural approach that would lead to that success. How did you formulate that, and what did it mean for the team?
Well, it was formulated by the team, not by me. And that's why it's successful, I think, because it's their culture. The leadership group 204, 205 developed that culture. And they discuss it with the whole team, and might have fine-tuned it a wee bit and say this is how we live, you know. And basically it's about that humbleness I was talking about before, striving to get better. Better never stops. And it's about respect for your mate, you know. It's about respecting your mate and making sure that he's doing the same. And so nobody lets that culture down, that humbleness, that striving to get better, so we don't want anybody falling off the rails doing that. Also respect for what's happened in the past, you know. You're wearing the black jersey with the silver fern, who's worn that jersey before you? What does that mean? Are you going to fill it out more than they did? You're going to add to that legacy and so on. So, and it's player driven. That culture is player driven. So if a player is drifting off the rails and not adhering to the culture of the team, a couple of the leaders will speak to that guy. And it's not a hard discussion. It's just a discussion, why are you falling off how can we help? What resources do you need? And so on. And they don't want to let the mates down. Now they might let granddad down, right? But they don't want to let their mates down, the guys they play with. Then you've got McCaw and Carter and Conrad Smith and Brad Thorne, you know, Kevin Mialamu, those sort of guys. These guys don't want to let them down, these younger fellas. So because they're their heroes when they're growing up. You know, Thorne's 36, Owen Franks is 21. And Thorne's pushing on Franks' bum. You know, he doesn't want to let him down. So it's having responsibility, the players having responsibility to making sure that culture thrives and gets better is a key.
And I think was it Sir Brian Lahore's line, better men or better people make better All Blacks?
You're well informed. You've done your homework. Yeah. So BJ, Sir Brian, I got involved in the team when I first coached in 204. So he's with us from 204 to 207, and he was a selector, but also a mentor for coaches, mentor for the management, and the players. And he coined that phrase. Better people make better All Blacks, because we were looking at the holistic thing. So it wasn't only about catch, pass, make the tackle. It was about being a great team person, you know, adding to the team, and connecting with the people. So those sort of things.
And that's very much the connection you see between sport and business, isn't it? Whatever you're trying to achieve, the way that you build that team, that sense of common purpose.
Yeah, like the purpose. Like we had the GOAT for a long time, GOAT, the greatest of all time. And today they try and be the best sporting team in the world. So it's a fairly clear purpose. And that galvanises, I can't remember the question now, but that galvanises people. They're striving to do that, and I think that collective purpose is very important, just like in business. I think Westpac want to make businesses stronger, the people that they're dealing with, so their relationships with those business people, they're trying to make them stronger, and as a result, try and make Australia a better place.
You talked about in the past about moving from a team-oriented coach to a player-oriented coach, I believe, and that was that sort of that 01 period where you realised you had to change. How much of your job as a leader, you know, if you can put a percentage on it, started to move from realising that it was not just about rugby and skills and training, but about people, and about how important it was, regardless of what you were trying to achieve, to make that connection with your people and to make them connect with each other?
I think the key to this is the culture that I was saying before. You know, if you haven't got a very strong set of behaviours, which is the culture, and that humbleness and that respect, no matter how well you coach, it's not going to work. So you need that foundation to be the best in the world. If you haven't got that foundation, you're wasting your time.
In Australia, the banking industry, our CEO has described it as having a trust gap, not being trusted enough by the people of Australia. We're in the news a lot. What advice would you give to businesses that are trying to build that trust gap with their customers? I assume it would be in line with some of this discussion around culture.
Who am I to tell the CEO of Westpac what he should be doing? Huh? And is that correct, or is that just, you know, sideshows going on which you need to ignore? But I think the first thing is to be able to trust each other. You know, in the All Blacks, trust, like McCaw said to me in 2011 after the World Cup, we trusted each other, Ted. We trusted each other. We didn't in 2007. So I think trust starts inside the business, and then and because you trust each other and you've got a very tight business relationship with your colleagues, then that can go out into your customers and so on. So it starts internally, I'm sure.
So when people ask you all the time, as I'm sure they do, who are your tips for the next World Cup? When you're looking at teams and assessing how they're going, I'm assuming now that you are very clearly also looking at the culture you see forming in teams. Who are the teams that you see on that path that clearly the All Blacks have set the standard for over the last few years?
Well, the Northern Hemisphere is getting stronger, aren't they? Particularly England and Ireland. I see the Irish beat the Springboks 39-3 in the weekend. That's mind-boggling. The Springboks couldn't have turned up. But so Joe Smith's doing a great job. Eddie Jones is doing a great job in building the culture of those teams. I was pleased to see the Wallabies and the Springboks improve this year, because World Rugby needs those teams to be strong. And I know there's still a long way to go, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Do you think?
I hope.
Yeah. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and that's good, because, you know, when you're not coaching, you want a contest. But for rugby's sake, we need teams to be strong and competitive, and that creates a lot of interest.
How much of an impact do you think what you did with the All Blacks has had an impact on international rugby? And I say this, seeing a number of players, they put out videos now of them sweeping out the change rooms in various teams around the world.
Yeah, like it's easy to talk about. It's harder to make it happen. Like, I've talked to a lot of businesses. Since I finished in 2011, I must have, well, many times I've talked about these things, and very few can actually make it work. They listen, they get enthusiastic, and then in a week's time they go back to their old ways. People don't like change, and unless you change, you're not going to get better, are you? The team's not going to get better, the business is not going to get better. So they go back to their old ways, and so unless they're collectively galvanised to do it and everybody's in behind it, it's not going to happen. So there's a very important process to go through to make that happen, and the All Blacks are still going through that process. And when you stop going through that process, that's when you're dead. That's when you die and people run past you. So it's constantly looking at how can we get better here, you know. So just recently, Gilbert Anoka and Steve Hansen went to America, went to West Point, went to the Navy SEALs and other, just trying to find things that they could add to their culture to make the All Blacks stronger. Because they know if they continue doing the same things that we did in 211 or what they did in 215, they're going to get past. So they need to keep on adding and improving. And making it a wee bit different, you know, because some guys are there for 10 years. Like McCaw was there from 2001 to 2015. That's a long time. My math's not very good, but so unless things changed during his time, he would maybe get bored. He's probably an exception, but you know what I mean?
So to that end, it's the people you bring together, the culture you put in place, and by the sounds of it, the hunger as well. I mean, to that end, it sounds like you would feel almost as much pleasure in seeing the team that you've helped build go on to win the 2015 World Cup as you did with the 2011.
For sure. It just reinforced that team culture was alive and well and getting better. You know, yes, I did. Thought went through my mind. It's gone. It happens when you get to 91, but there we are.
All right. So Graham Henry, that was fantastic. Some great insight into the kind of lessons from being right at the pinnacle of rugby that we can take into business. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Enjoyed it.